The geography of the American landfilling is not random. It is rather a near-perfect illustration of how environmental burdens in this country flow reliably toward communities with the least political and economic power to resist them. They are highly profitable enterprises with sophisticated lobbying operations and a demonstrated institutional willingness to fight any regulation that might affect their operating model. Welcome to Threat Level Red. I'm Charles Denyer. Today, we begin a 5-part investigation into something that happens to your garbage after it disappears from your curb. Something that most Americans really do not think much about. Something that is right now, at this very moment, happening beneath the soil in thousands of locations across the country, many of them near where people live and source their drinking water. We're calling this series Buried Beneath Us. Over 5 episodes, we're going to trace the rise of the American landfill, from its origins as a supposed improvement over open dumping, through its transformation into a multi-billion-dollar industry, to its present reality as a slow-moving environmental problem, one the waste management industry has long minimized, managed, and kept largely out of public view. We are going to talk about leachate, the toxic black soup seeping into groundwater beneath closed landfills right now. We are going to talk about methane, a greenhouse gas far more potent than CO2, approximately 80 times more powerful over a 20-year period, rising from the buried organic waste in every active enclosed landfill in the country. We are going to talk about the communities, largely poor, largely non-white, that have been made to live next to those facilities, while the rest of America practice the only civic virtue its consumer culture actually demands, which is not looking.
Welcome to Threat Level Red, a Charles Denyer Productions podcast. Every week, Charles brings his real-world expertise to the front lines of America's most pressing threats: cyber attacks, extremist networks, rogue states, terrorism, economic instability, systemic breakdowns, and so much more. From the digital battleground to the streets of America, no threat is left uncovered. No spin, no filters, just intel.
We start where the landfill itself starts, at the beginning, at the hole in the ground. For most of American history, waste disposal meant exactly what the word disposal implies: getting rid of something by putting it somewhere else. That somewhere else for most of the 19th and early 20th centuries was an open dump, a piece of land at the edge of a city or town where garbage was deposited, burned periodically, and otherwise left decomposed or not as nature directed. Open dumps were foul. They were rat-infested, they caught fire regularly, they contaminated nearby streams and wells, and they were impossible to miss. Everyone who lived near one, which then as now tended to mean the poorest residents of a given community, knew exactly what they were living next to. The landfill as a concept and a word was presented to the American public beginning in the 1930s and 1940s as a technological and sanitary improvement over the open dump. The key innovations were burial and compaction. Rather than leaving waste exposed at the surface level where it could be seen, smelled, and connected to its consequences, the sanitary landfill, as its early proponents carefully called it, would place waste in layers, compact it with heavy machinery, and cover each layer with soil. Burial would eliminate the visual offense of the open dump. Compaction would reduce the volume. The soil cover would suppress odors and discourage vermin. The Army Corps of Engineers had used the technique during World War II for military waste disposal, and its apparent cleanliness compared to open dumping gave it a scientific credibility that accelerated its adoption by municipal governments across the country in the post-war decades. What the early advocates of the sanitary landfill did not fully grapple with, and what the waste industry that grew up around it would spend decades minimizing and denying, was that burial does not mean neutralization. Putting waste underground does not make it inert. It changes the chemistry of decomposition in ways that create entirely new categories of hazard. It concentrates waste in ways that make contamination, when it occurs, far more severe and far more expensive to address. And it creates a legacy of environmental obligation that extends for decades or centuries beyond the operational life of the facility. An obligation that the industry has proven extraordinarily creative at shifting away from itself and onto taxpayers, onto regulators, and onto the communities that were never, in most cases, given a meaningful choice about whether to host the facility in the first place. And the word sanitary did enormous work. It reframed waste disposal, taking something communities feared and resented and dressing it up in the language of science and public health. That very transformation has been the industry's most durable asset for 80 years. The landfill sounds clean, the landfill sounds managed, and the landfill sounds like a solution. However, it is not. The waste management industry as it exists today took its modern shape in the 1960s and 1970s when a combination of factors, rapid suburban growth, the explosive increase in disposable consumer packaging following World War II, and new federal environmental regulations beginning with the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act of 1976 all created both the enormous volume of waste and the regulatory framework that transformed garbage into an extraordinarily lucrative business. The key players in that transformation are a small number of corporations that, through acquisition, consolidation, and decades of aggressive expansion, came to dominate the American waste landscape. Waste Management Incorporated, founded in 1968 and now the largest waste company in North America, grew from a regional hauling operation into a national empire through a strategy of acquiring municipal contracts and independent operators across the country. And there are others, Republic Services, BFI, Clean Harbors, and a handful of regional operators that control a significant portion of the American waste stream today. The consolidation of the industry was not accidental. It was a long-term, deliberate strategy carried out over decades aimed at consolidating control and strengthening pricing power in municipal waste markets where alternatives are limited and switching costs are high. And the financial scale of this industry is worth noting for a moment. The American waste management sector generates approximately $70 to $80 billion in annual revenue. Add in the recycling aspect of waste management, and we're up to as much as $150 billion a year. That's big business, and don't think for a second anyone in the industry wants this train to stop. Waste Management Incorporated alone has reported revenues over $20 billion in recent fiscal years. These are not marginal businesses scraping by in unglamorous sectors, not at all. They are highly profitable enterprises with sophisticated lobbying operations, close relationships with state and federal regulators, and a demonstrated institutional willingness to fight any regulation that might affect their operating model. The CEO of Waste Management has in recent years earned compensation packages exceeding $15 million annually. The company's shareholders have been made very comfortable by the business of other people's garbage.
Tonight, new concerns from the city of Murfreesboro as their battle with the landfill rages on in court.
The Middle Point landfill racked up 7 violations from the state so far this year, and the smell continues to travel farther outside the city.
So the economic logic of landfilling, once you understand it from the industry's perspective, is almost elegant in its simplicity. The industry charges municipalities and commercial operators tipping fees to accept their waste. It deposits that waste in holes in the ground. The land for those holes, typically acquired in locations with low property values and limited political opposition, costs relatively little compared to the tipping fees it will generate over the facility's operational lifetime. Once full, the landfill is then capped and nominally closed, and the company enters a post-closure care period during which it is theoretically responsible for ongoing leachate management, methane capture, and groundwater monitoring, typically for 30 years under current EPA regulations, after which the liability largely transfers to the state or the local community. 30 years, folks. For waste that will be chemically active for centuries. That equation, private profit in the present, long-term risk pushed into the future, is the core business model of the American waste management industry. So the United States currently operates about 2,000 active municipal solid waste landfills. That number sounds large. It is actually a fraction of what it once was. There were more than 8,000 operating landfills in 1988, not because America is producing less waste, oh no, not at all, but because individual landfills have grown dramatically larger as regulations tightened and smaller operations became economically unviable. The modern mega landfill accepts millions of tons of waste per year, drawing from vast geographic areas through networks of transfer stations and long-haul transport routes. Some of the largest landfills in the country accept waste from dozens of states. The Fresh Kills landfill in Staten Island, before its closure in 2001, was visible from space. But the active landfills are only part of the picture. The more troubling dimension, the one the industry and its regulators have consistently downplayed, is the legacy of more than 10,000 closed landfills scattered across the country, many of which predate modern environmental regulations entirely and were constructed with none of the protective infrastructure now required of new facilities. These older landfills were often sited directly on permeable soils, sometimes directly over aquifers. They were built without liners, without leachate collection systems, without methane management infrastructure, and without any of the engineered safeguards that are supposed to separate the contents of a modern landfill from the surrounding environment. And they were closed, sometimes through a formal regulatory process, more often simply by being filled to capacity and abandoned, and then largely forgotten by everyone except the communities that happened to live on the top of them or beside them. Forgotten until the water turned, or the test results came back from the county, or a local parent started noticing the illness patterns in her neighborhood and began asking questions that no one in authority seemed eager to answer. The geography of the American landfilling is not random. It is rather a near-perfect illustration of how environmental burdens in this country flow reliably toward communities with the least political and economic power to resist them. This is not an accusation. It is a documented finding replicated across decades of research by environmental justice scholars, federal agencies, and investigative journalists. The United Church of Christ's landmark 1987 report, Toxic Wastes and Race in the United States, found that race was the single most significant factor in determining the location of hazardous waste facilities in the United States, more significant than income, more significant than property values, and more significant than population density. Subsequent studies have confirmed and extended these findings, especially for landfills. Communities of color are significantly more likely to host landfills than white communities with comparable income levels. The disparities are not small. They are large, consistent, and have been growing over time as the communities around existing facilities have become increasingly non-white, in part because the presence of the facility depresses property values and drives out residents with the economic means to leave, replacing them with families who cannot afford to go anywhere else. And the siting process for landfills has historically reinforced these patterns rather than correcting them. Waste management companies are rational actors in a market. They site facilities where land is cheap, where political opposition is weak, and where the regulatory environment is permissive. These conditions have consistently coexisted in communities of color and in low-income rural communities, which typically lack the organized political capacity, the legal resources, the media access, and the connections to state environmental agencies that more affluent and more politically powerful communities deploy successfully to defeat unwanted facilities. The result, documented across 40 years of research, is a system in which the communities least responsible for generating America's consumption problem are most reliably made to bear its physical consequences. So that's where we end part one. In part two, we're going to go into the chemistry. We're going to talk about what actually happens inside a landfill, the toxic liquid called leachate, the greenhouse gas seeping into the atmosphere, the communities whose water is being quietly poisoned right now, and why the industry and its regulators have spent decades ensuring the public does not have a clear picture of what that chemistry actually means. Stay with us.
Threat Level Red is a Charles Denyer Productions podcast. For more information, visit charlesdenyer.com to learn more about current and upcoming podcasts and episodes, current and future book publications, professional services offered by Charles, and much more. All opinions expressed are those of the host and do not reflect the official positions of any government agency, military branch, or national security organization.